We will spend tens of millions of dollars to make sure that the Republicans do not rig the midterm elections.
So, believe it or not, despite the fact that it is now June, many redistricting wars are still happening, and they're happening specifically because Democrats are the ones insisting on fighting them and then continually losing. You may remember Hakeem Jeffries had this big blow up over Republican efforts and the Supreme Court decision saying, we're going to fight back, we're going to do everything with all of our political power. And those F around and find out style statements have rapidly fallen apart as every different place where Democrats have tried to fight us directly, and not rhinos, but Democrats go one-on-one with the Republican redistricting effort, I kid you not, they are losing every single time. And that is once again the case today in Alabama, where after a federal appeals court sided with the Democrats and Democrats ran around celebrating, guess what? The U.S. National Supreme Court has indeed upheld the Alabama redistricting effort, which means it will be going into effect. In fact, many of the Democrat efforts are actually beginning to draw upheaval and backlash from within their own party. For example, there's a recent piece out of the New York Times that details the clash currently taking place between Hakeem Jeffries and Abigail Spanberger, that is, of course, the Democrat governor of Virginia, because she's basically of the position, let's move on from this. We lost. We should focus on the midterm elections. And she's actually seething that Hakeem Jeffries keeps on bringing redistricting up and is still trying to somehow find a way to win in Virginia, even though that ship has already sailed. Okay, they lost. It's done. But she's also further arguing that this is distracting Democrats from the actual elections that they need to win in the midterms, which is likewise completely true. So I'm standing back and, of course, enjoying all of this. It's nice to watch your opposition kind of implode on itself, but also kind of flail in these very useless, counterproductive, incompetent decisions, starting a bunch of battles that you can't win, not very good for political momentum. And that is, of course, the case when it comes to redistricting. So we'll bring you the latest updates as well as some of these internal clashes within the party today that I do find to be pretty hilarious. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, the headline news of tonight is that the U.S. Supreme Court has indeed stepped in. So basically, Alabama, as you could expect, they did the redistricting, and what happened? At the behest of Hakeem Jeffries and AOC and many of the Democrats who you may remember went down to Alabama and southern states to go campaign, the leftists launched a lawsuit against the Alabama redistricting effort. Now, needless to say, that largely from the beginning was going to be a big waste of time and money, because what Alabama did was already in accordance with the VRA decision. There's not really a chance that Democrats were going to win here, but Hakeem Jeffries vowed, we're going to be maximalist. We're going to fight even if it means we're losing and wasting a bunch of time and money. So basically, Democrats ended up suing over it. Now, a liberal-leaning appeals court did actually side with the Democrats, and so for about a couple of days, it was the case that Alabama Supreme Court map has been struck down or at least put on hold by an injunction. But of course, as you could expect, first of all, they made a huge mistake sending it to federal court, because guess what? That means it goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court today, in a 6-3 decision exactly along ideological lines, ended up ruling that Alabama's 6-1 congressional map can be held up and will be going into effect. And of course, once again, we're going to hear the typical whining from Democrats that, oh, if you're allowed to redistrict, why can't we do that in Virginia? I'm going to go back to the same point we made from the beginning. It's not our fault you didn't follow state law. It's not our fault, too, by the way, that you let this battle go to the Supreme Court, who in the end, decided to side against you, even though it's a largely liberal-leaning state. Okay, that's not our problem. That's not our problem. The fact of the matter is, you can say it's unfair. You can say if Republicans can redraw, we should too. Well, it's up to you to follow your own procedures and laws. It's not that difficult. That's actually the very easy distinction. When we redistrict, it was legal. When you guys did it, it wasn't. It really is that simple. But that has not stopped Hakeem Jeffries to this very day from still flailing and seething about everything that's happening with redistricting right now, and still vowing to fight, even though you really have to ask, what is the point of fighting now at this rate, right? But that's the direction he's heading.
I think we all recognize the sensitivities of the moment in terms of an unprecedented Jim Crow-like assault on black political representation that has been unleashed by the Supreme Court's outrageous decision to gut the Voting Rights Act.
So you don't have to be a psychologist to detect a sense of flailing desperation in his voice. He literally sounds like he's about to cry. And you notice the change in tone over the span of just about a month and a half, where at the end of April, what was Hakeem Jeffries saying? F around and find out, acting so tough, vowing that Democrats would fight back. And now he's basically at the point of, this is so bad what they're doing. Really, you can tell like this guy's helpless to a large extent. There's not a lot they can do. But as I said, they're basically flailing in a sense. You know, they're just saying, oh, well, we're going to figure out a way to fight. This is so bad. They can't believe they're doing. There's nothing they're going to do. In fact, the only way that Democrats actually are fighting is starting useless legal battles that they know they're going to lose. So you would think if you're Hakeem at this point, it would be in your best interest to just shut up about redistricting, because realize it or not, losing is not good for the optics of your political party. And so if you keep talking about how you keep on getting destroyed, and every time you vow you're going to fight, you end up losing, that damages your image. It actually sort of demoralizes your own voter base. Like, this is a very real psychological pattern that we notice in politics. That's why we say momentum matters in politics, right? So when you keep kicking up a battle that you keep on losing, that's actually not productive. And at the same time, one could make the very strong argument that this is actually distracting Democrats away from the issues they really need to focus on in the midterms, because let's be real about it. The redistricting stuff largely is over. Despite Hakeem Jeffries vowing to find an alternative way to fix the loss in Virginia, it's not going to happen, and really it's too late at this point anyway. You know, there's nothing they can really do. I'm not going to sell you any leftist fantasy to the contrary, right? So you would think just shut up about this, move on. Hakeem refuses to do it. He's still dedicating party resources to advocate in favor of left-wing DEI districts and rigging elections in the name of affirmative action or something. But I actually can tell you that it is apparently causing some uproar within the Democrat Party itself. As a matter of fact, Abigail Spanberger, the very Democrat governor who recently has kind of leaked this idea to the media that she didn't want to redistrict the entire time because she thought it was going to lose, and the state legislature forced her into that, which is something, honestly, I do not actually believe. I think that Spanberger basically is trying to now figure out a way to cope with the humiliation, right? This is her new excuse that, oh, I actually didn't want anything to do about it. I had the same legal concerns. It was not going to win. But it's just simply the reality that after being elected by, let's be honest, a pretty impressive margin last year, her approval rating has largely collapsed. Why is that? Because instead of actually governing as the supposed pragmatic moderate she pretended to be, not only did they immediately get into office and sweep the board with a bunch of left-wing legislation, but especially this whole redistricting issue, not only did she lose it, which makes it, again, look bad for her. You know, it's just a bad look. It's an embarrassment. But then secondly, sort of out herself as this big partisan, she is figuring out a way to maybe gain that back, which is exactly why she basically has told Hakeem Jeffries, leave my state alone and stop trying to fight this losing battle over redistricting. I find this recent piece out of the New York Times to be really interesting. We'll just read it for you so you can kind of get a sense of what's happening here, okay? So with Democrat efforts to redraw Virginia's congressional boundaries in shambles for now, two central figures are in the fight are at odds over what to do next. So as we've established, Rep. Hakeem Jeffries of New York, who is the minority leader of the House, continues to push for, you remember he said this in his own words, quote, maximum warfare everywhere all the time, vowing with a phrase he borrowed from Republicans to redraft lines to give Democrats an advantage not only in Virginia, but across the country before the 2028 elections, which, you know, is just not particularly, I think, the type of language you want to be running for a national election, even if that's implicitly what you're trying to do. You know, maybe lay off that a little bit. Right? There's a reason why, for example, even in 2024, although a lot of us said this is Trump's revenge tour, he backed off of that rhetoric because guess what? You don't want to sound crazy to the national electorate. You don't want to sound like extreme, right? This is a known thing. And basically Spanberger saying to Jeffries, dude, lay off of this stuff. What's wrong? And she's probably not the only Democrat saying it, right? But you can tell to a large extent, Jeffries has just completely lost his mind over this. And maybe he's panicking, obviously, that if Democrats lose or even just underperform in the House elections, he might be out as leader. But anyways, Governor Spanberger of Virginia, whose approval ratings have dropped since she campaigned for her state's redistricting referendum, gee, I wonder why, is actually urging her party to back off and drop its quest for partisan advantage in favor of a more pressing issue, winning the midterms. Well, maybe in this sense, she sounds like the slightly smarter Democrat. I don't know if either of them are all that smart. But anyways, here's what she allegedly had to say about it in an interview. Actually, maybe she said this publicly. Quote, "It is outrageously premature of us to be talking about any sort of redistricting or map changing effort when we have to win the most consequential midterms of my lifetime in this November," basically accusing Hakeem Jeffries of losing focus here, taking a rather unsubtle jab at Jeffries and reflecting broader disquiet among Democrats about how to counter Republican gerrymandering efforts, redistricting, fair redistricting efforts, not gerrymanders, New York Times, after the Virginia decision. But she basically came out to say she would not oppose implementing a partisan gerrymander. But what she said is, and this makes sense, right? The issue is something they would prefer to leave aside for now and focus on this fall's midterm elections. And she said even further here, quote, "Anytime someone, whether it's Hakeem or anyone else, talks about some other point off in the future, it's a distraction from the task on hand, which is winning in November." And basically went on to say, look, every time we talk about redistricting, every time we keep picking up this fight, we're not talking about affordability, is another kind of point she tried to argue there. And then secondly, maybe she doesn't admit this publicly, but I'm going to say it on her behalf. Yes, again, it just looks bad. It just makes Democrats look incompetent and stupid and, just not where the vibes are, right? And vibes do matter in politics. If they keep on like these Looney Tunes characters, okay, like Wile E. Coyote or something, trying to drop the anvil on the Republicans' head and then losing every single time. As I said, that's an iron rule of politics. You look better when you win. You don't look as good when you lose. You're not as popular when you lose, which, let's be honest, doesn't just apply to politics. It applies to sports, entertainment, culture. Yeah, Democrats to a large extent are killing their own momentum, and I would argue that's what Spanberger's mad about. Again, she's probably figuring out also ways to deflect the blame from her because her approval ratings have not done well after, again, outing herself, picking this battle, right? And taking a huge political risk in doing so. And then when you lose the battle, that just makes you look even worse because the moderates who thought, oh, well, she's going to be a moderate, now she's been exposed as a radical. But then you make yourself just look stupid and incompetent at the same time when you can't even be successful in the battle. So we've made that point, but apparently Jeffries declined to comment on this article, but also mentioned the goal of flipping multiple seats in Virginia this year during his own remarks. And he said, quote, "We're going to work as hard as we can to advance of 2028 to restore that 10-1 map because that's what voters decided would happen." But yeah, again, when you are spending money and wasting time and political capital on this, which, at this point, I don't know how they're going to manage to do it again. Yeah, that's every moment you're spending doing that is a moment that you're not campaigning on the things that actually do matter, right? Focus is very key. And, honestly, what would Democrats do? Let's ask that question. How can Democrats even reinstate their 10-1 map? So you could try to do another referendum and say, let's say 2027, but I'll just be honest. The first time around, it almost lost. Okay, we remember it was very close. Given the big humiliation that took place the second time around and how bad the whole thing has looked, and I don't even know the legality. Can you do the same referendum twice? But even if you can, I wouldn't say it's honestly a guarantee that thing passes, right? And you can't do it through the state legislature because famously, they already amended the state constitution to have one of these so-called independent redistricting commissions. So what is the point of even doing that? I'm not exactly sure. And you would think for 2028, your goal should just be to win the election and have the presidential ticket carry it. But no, if the DNC wants to spend all this time fighting a losing redistricting battle, then I guess that's their own problem. But there you essentially have it, guys. It is nonstop defeat. And it's even they're losing so bad, they're turning on each other when it comes to this redistricting thing. Yeah, that's why victory is important. Winning is actually everything, People who tell you sometimes that winning is not everything, you know, I understand in some cases in life, yes, winning's not everything, but also it kind of is, right? Because yes, it does matter whether you win or lose. And you look at even the morale of your party, the momentum of your party, victory is important. That's a lesson we should internalize. That's clearly a lesson the Democrats right now are not internalizing, and it's causing issues for them. That said, guys, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.